Let's talk about what's happening in lung cancer today. So, what's new in lung cancer? What are some of our stats? What are we looking at?
There's a lot of really exciting stuff in lung cancer, and it's all really broken down into the different treatments that are available for cancer and ones that are available for lung cancer. So, lung cancer, one of the options for treatment is typically surgery. So, there's a lot of clinical trials going on with surgery to try and do it safer, to try and remove more cancerous tissue, and to try and reduce side effects. There's also things going on in radiation therapy, so different ways of delivering radiation. There's also ones that are going on in immunotherapy and targeted therapies, which are these really exciting areas of drugs for lung cancer research that are really working on in immunotherapy, using your own immune system to target cancer and kill it within your body, and targeted therapies where it's really personalized and involving specific mutations to specifically target those cancer cells. So there's lots of different things that are going on that you can all check out on healmary.com.
Fantastic. So, let's break this down for everyone. So, you said a new surgery trial. What's happening in surgeries?
So the one in surgery that I'll bring up today is really interesting. So this clinical trial is located in Pennsylvania and it's recruiting patients with lung cancer. And one of the things that's been happening with surgery over time is that because the lungs are inside the body, a lot of the ways that before surgeons would have to access the lungs is involving a big surgery, which involves big incisions, and then really invasive, so going inside the body. So the problems with those types of surgeries is that it involves lots of cuts and can have side effects and a big slow recovery time afterwards. So, where surgeries are really moving right now is towards using robotic assisted and really minimally invasive surgeries that would involve making a small incision and then going through using these new advanced technologies that are coming. So, with this all in mind, one of the problems with using a more minimally invasive surgery is that the doctor can't really look into your lungs and see and really identify where that tumor tissue is. And this is a really important problem because about 25% of cancer patients with lung cancer do go through surgeries. And so it's really important to have technology to be able to really identify and remove as much lung cancer tissue as possible, because if it can all be removed, it can lead to a complete cure rate. So, what this clinical trial is doing, which is really interesting, is they've developed a technology that basically allows this drug to be injected via IV, so intravenously, and it travels to the site where you have cancerous tissue. So, in the case of lung cancer, in the lungs, and it binds very specifically to enzymes that are involved with cancer cells. So, it's targeting cancer cells. And when the surgeons are then going through to try and remove cancerous tissue, they shine a light, and then the cancerous tissue literally illuminates based on the way this drug is. So it goes to the cancer site, and then it actually just illuminates so the surgeon can fully see the difference between cancerous tissue and healthy tissue, and then really accurately remove all of it because it's just matching. Okay, this is illuminated in green, therefore it's cancerous tissue, so we'll remove this. So it's really exciting to be able to get rid of as much cancer tissue as possible and really lead to positive outcomes for patients.
What's new with radiation? You mentioned radiation trials were happening.
Right, yeah, there's a lot of different radiation trials that are happening all across the United States, but the one that I'll bring up today is using a different type of administrating radiation, and it's called using an adaptive radiotherapy technique. So, to understand why this is different from normal radiation, we have to kind of understand how normal radiation works first. So, typically, when you have a tumor in the lungs that is being treated by radiation, the doctors will use imaging scans to figure out the location of the tumor and then also the size of the tumor first. And based on that information, they'll figure out the best dose of radiation to give to you. And then they'll give you that dose for the whole duration of your treatment until your tumor has shrunk and for that amount of time. The way that adaptive radiotherapy works is slightly different, where it just involves a lot more monitoring of the tumor throughout the entire process. So rather than just looking at the tumor on day one and figuring out the best dose, the doctors will figure out the best dose on the first day. And then the next day that you come in for your next radiotherapy treatment, they'll again image your tumor to see whether it's moved or whether it's shrunken. And then based on how the size has changed or how the location has changed, then they can determine whether a different dose is better for you to use. So it involves a lot more checking and then basing the radiotherapy dose based on how your tumor is really responding. So it's a really dynamic process that's a lot more tailored to you and how your tumor is responding. So the really interesting benefit about this is that it can be really useful at reducing side effects from radiation for people because a lot of times radiation is can't always be super targeted, so you're targeting the tumor, but if it begins to shrink, then you're targeting the tumor still, but also some of the healthy tissue around it. Whereas by using this adaptive approach, as the tumor shrinks, you lower the dose that's still just targeting only that tumor tissue as much as possible. So this is a really exciting dynamic way that's really tailored to the patient, and this is being evaluated in clinical trials right now to see if it reduces side effects.
So it almost sounds like a customized radiation plan that's tweaked according to how your tumor is reacting to the treatment.
Exactly, that's exactly right. So the dose that you're getting on day 1 might be completely different than the dose you're getting 2 weeks later, and that will all depend on how your tumor is changing and responding to the treatment.
Do you know offhand how many sites are currently doing this in the US?
So this specific study that we'll add a link about afterwards is located only in Alabama, so it's recruiting in that area of the United States. But if you're interested in this type of radiation therapy, then you can look up on the Heal Mary website for adaptive radiotherapy and see if there are any other locations that are closer to your area.
So let's talk about the cancer vaccine trial that you were saying and maybe break it down because when I think of vaccine, I'm thinking the shot we just got or the flu shot or how does this work?
So it's actually a good analogy when you're bringing up how this works with vaccines, the flu shot, and the COVID vaccine. So we can kind of use that analogy to explain how how cancer vaccines work because they're really quite similar. So the way the COVID-19 vaccine worked is basically in your body, you have something called an immune system, which is your own body's protection against cells that are not working properly. So that would mean cancer, but then also foreign invaders like vaccines and bacteria. So, when we recently had the flu shot or the COVID-19 vaccine, the vaccine is made in a way to target specific proteins that scientists have identified on that virus that they want us to stop getting sick from. So, in COVID-19, the big flashy word was the spike protein, which is a protein that's on the outside of the COVID-19 virus. And by targeting that protein on the outside, scientists can create vaccines that prime our immune system to look for that protein, and then once they see it, to target it and then to kill it. So, really, a similar thing is happening in cancer vaccines. So, now I'll kind of break down what the term is in cancer vaccines, and it's called specifically personalized neoantigen vaccines. So, the way this whole concept works in cancer is that, as we know, cancer is caused by mutations that happen in your DNA that then lead to different proteins being expressed on the outside of cells that are cancerous versus your healthy ones. So, your cancerous cells will have different profiles that makes it look different to our body than what healthy cells should look like. So your immune system naturally does a good job at killing cancer cells because it looks abnormal and foreign to the body. But what scientists are doing with this vaccine process in cancer vaccines is to make our body even more adaptable and more able to be primed to recognize that this is what it wants to kill. So, the way this clinical trial for these personalized vaccines is working is patients will enroll in the clinical trial and their tumor DNA will then be sequenced. So, scientists can understand specifically what mutations you have, which will be likely different than mutations that another person with lung cancer has. So, once they figure out what specific mutations there are, they can design vaccines that are targeted to that specific protein from that specific mutation that's unique to you and then create a vaccine from it that they can give to your body so your body is primed and more able to find those cells. So it's really interesting. It's a very similar process to normal vaccines. It's all about training your immune system to recognize this foreign thing that is primed in the vaccines through antigens, which bind very specifically to that protein on the outside. And what's really amazing about this is that it's completely personalized. So everyone's cancer is different. A lot of the times, there are different mutations that can be involved. And so this is a way that by using DNA sequencing of the tumor, that we can really target this vaccine very specifically to your own immune system to make your immune system really fast and adept at killing your own cancer cells.
So in a way, in my head, I'm thinking this personalized vaccine trial sounds like it's could be a targeted therapy. Is it the same thing as a targeted therapy?
It's a very similar concept to targeted therapies. Basically, a targeted therapy is meaning that it's specifically targeted to a specific protein or a specific gene. And so, in this way, immunotherapy is also really targeted because immunotherapy is targeting a specific protein too. Generally, it would fall under the concept of immunotherapy because it's using your immune system to target and kill the cancer cells, as opposed to targeted therapies typically mean like inactivating a gene and making it like it kind of gets blocked. So it's still using your immune system, your own immune system to fight the cancer cells.
Got it. So outside of immunotherapy, then, is there something happening with targeted therapies that could be interesting?
Yes, there's a lot of different things happening in lung cancer with targeted therapies. And that's because in lung cancer, like a lot of different other cancers, there tends to be mutations that are pretty common within the population. So, one mutation that a lot of people might know of is EFGR, and that's a mutation that's involved in one of the proteins that helps to control cell growth. So, when there's a mutation in it, then too much cell growth happens, and then that's what contributes to cancer. So, this specific clinical trial that I'll bring up is one that's not involved with looking at this other gene, EFGR, but instead it's looking at a specific mutation called KRAS. So, KRAS is another mutation that's really common in lung cancer, but right now it's not being screened for in people with lung cancer, whereas more high profile genes such as EFGR are. And so, what this clinical trial is doing is it's bringing patients in with lung cancer and then first testing using genomics to see if they have this KRAS mutation. If they have the KRAS mutation, and also to preface, the KRAS mutation involves a gene that helps to control cell growth and cell death. So when this gene is mutated in cancer, it can lead to too much cell growth and too little cell death, which means you're having these cells that should be dying accumulate too quickly. So if the patients come back with a positive KRAS mutation, then during this clinical trial, they'll be given a drug called sotorasib, which specifically inactivates KRAS. So what's happening here is these patients have this very specific mutation, and then using this drug, it's specifically targeting that mutation to then inactivate the gene. So the idea here is if you have this gene that's causing too much cell growth, and then if you inactivate it, it can really lead to that cell growth stopping. It can even lead to the cancer and tumor cell decreasing. So this is an example of a targeted therapy that's looking at a newer type of mutation that's not as commonly treated in lung cancer. And so this whole process is really showing how cancer treatment is becoming increasingly more targeted, and all the time we're finding more mutations that might be different from person to person that we can target really specifically to treat the cancer.
And I always ask you, Hannah, at the end of these segments, just as a quick reminder, why would we participate in a clinical trial right now?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons to participate in a clinical trial. What I would always say is that generally, no matter who you are, whether you have just been diagnosed with cancer or whether you've been fighting and battling cancer for a really long time, and are at more later stages where a cancer might have spread a lot, it's always a really good idea to see what's out there because, as we can even see in this video where I only outlined 5 different trials, is that there's so much diversity out there. We're always trying to find new ways to be more targeted to specifically you or to reduce side effects. And so even for this example that I talked about surgery, right? A lot of patients might undergo surgery, but being involved in this fluorescence clinical trial might help the doctors be able to remove more of your tumors because it can actually be illuminated on a video screen. And so it's a really good idea just to see what's out there. And once you see what's out there, you can bring it back to your doctor and see whether your doctor thinks that it's a good option for you or whether you should stick with standard therapies. So generally, clinical trials can give you access to things that aren't currently available to the general population, such as these personalized vaccines, which are very exciting, but they take a lot of energy and manpower to create. So this whole process of doing it is still being figured out right now. So you have the opportunity to participate in things that are more targeted, more specific to you, and then other sides too. So decreasing side effects, monitoring symptoms more closely. And so there's a lot of different benefits overall. The other thing that I will always mention, because the cancer community is always really excited about research, and everybody is so knowledgeable about their own healthcare these days, is that by participating in clinical trials, it really helps to push the needle forward to find more mutations that can be having targeted treatments developed for, or just to get these treatments that are in clinical trials out to the general population. So every time you participate, you're helping to add more evidence and more data to get these treatments out for everybody and really provide the best outcomes for everybody who's fighting cancer.